For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nguyen. I'm Associate Vice Provost for Career Services at Illinois Tech. And we're really happy to have all of you here today for what we think is going to be a really informative program. Before I introduce our panelists, I just want to tell you a little bit about Career Services and let you know that we are here to support you. We realize that it is definitely a challenging time in the job market for all our students, but especially, for our students that are, and for you, that are international. With the pandemic and what's happening, we have certainly seen a slowdown in hiring, but I want to reassure you that we are definitely here to support you in your job search efforts. We're open to your feedback, and going into the fall semester, we're going to be rolling out a whole litany of online and virtual programs, including virtual career fairs. We're going to offer virtual programs and sessions, and do a lot of things in a hybrid mode as well, similar to the university. So we really want to be here to support your efforts. You can definitely feel free to reach out to myself or any member of my team as it relates to your career planning needs. But again, I want to reassure you that we're going to be there for you to assist you with your job search. So leading up to that, what we're doing today is really a panel that's really focused on, I think, a really important topic, and that's really both understanding the process of curricular practical training and optional practical training from the employer perspective, and especially how that applies to you in terms of your job search. We realize there's a lot of information to digest, and that you may have a lot of questions as well, but really the goal for today is how do you best present yourself, and really share knowledge to employers about both OPT and CPT, because from my own conversations, I realize that there's a lot of misconceptions that could be out there, even from the employer side of things as well. So we want to give you at least as a starting point, the information you need to be successful as you embark on your job search, regardless if it's for an internship, full-time, or anything else that's similar. So with that said, I'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And Kemmie, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks, T. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kemmie Onojoli. I am the director of the International Center at Illinois Tech. We are the office that many of you may be aware of, you have worked with. We take care of all students' immigration concerns when you are here. So things related to CPT, OPT, STEM OPT, extending your I-20 and things like that. We take care of that for you. My staff and myself, or 7 of us, we're here to support you and all our students as we head into a very interesting fall semester. So thank you so much for being here this afternoon. I am sure that it will be worth your while. Thank you.
Thanks, Kemmie. And a related note, Kemmie, you are one of the smartest people I know when it comes to all the issues related to this. Kemmie was on a panel the other day for new students, and I was amazed, Kemmie, by your level of knowledge. So
thank you. That was interesting, but thank you. Thanks, T.
Yeah. Next, we have Matt Massucci. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, T, for having me on, and also working with you on this, Kemmie. So my name is Matt Massucci. I'm the founder and CEO of Careerwell. We're a Chicago-based talent acquisition firm. We've been in business going on 20 years, heavy focus on partnering with high growth tech companies with, to help solve and sort of answer their talent acquisition needs. So as again, having done this for almost 20 years, we've seen a pretty interesting, view on the market. And, when the COVID hit back in March, we made the conscious effort to, broaden sort of our offerings and what we do for people. And then one of the things we've launched is, an additional business called Careerwell. So what we've helped do is help people kind of get better at their job search. So through my conversations with T and some other people in career services, we recognized that an opportunity to help people understand kind of how to put your best foot forward, how to look for a job in kind of the most cutting edge and practical ways. And our conversations is international students are at a particular challenging point. I mean, it's hard for anybody looking for jobs right now, but when you have kind of the additional variables of being on an OPT or something along those lines, it's educating employers on how to talk through those and helping them understand what those mean are valuable. So that's really what we're looking to solve and sort of help answer for all of you in today's session.
Great, thank you, Matt. And again, what we want to do today is really make this more conversational. What you'll notice on your Zoom screen is that there's a Q&A section. So please post all your questions to the Q&A section. I'll do my best to really moderate as we go along with the specific questions that you have. And I'm amazed that we have 38 participants as well. So it's great to see the number of folks joining in. But to get things started, I've got a couple questions for both of you. So Kemmie, this question is a little bit more directed at you, but Matt, feel free to chime in as well. I think, a good starting point was really providing just a really quick, Kemmie, a high level overview of OPT, CPT, especially, from your perspective in terms of your office and so forth. And the one thing I want to add to that, I think one of the misconceptions that's out there is that OPT, CPT are employer sponsorship. And that's not the case. There is a distinction between the two, but that often is a point of confusion. So Kemmie or Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about that as well, but we'll start there.
Okay, so let me start. I normally explain this as if it's a continuum, like, you're starting from one point and then you're going to the very point, the very end rather. So the first thing I'll talk about, very high level, not specific to anyone or any situation, is curricular practical training, CPT. This is when, this is the authorization that allows you to work with an employer in the US after you have spent 1 year in status as an F1 student, okay? So once you have been registered full-time for at least 2 consecutive semesters in the US, you are then eligible to approach an employer, obtain an offer letter from them. You bring that offer letter to the International Center, you do a few paperwork, and then we give you an updated I-20 that will list the information of the employer on that I-20. It would have a name of the employer, the address, the start date, and the end date of the employer. So that's CPT. At Illinois Tech, CPT can be for part-time or full-time, depending on what you find. So we do allow for students to be enrolled, so to speak, for full-time or part-time CPT. So that's CPT. You do it, it's more an internship, so that's why it's called curricular. It's attached to your curriculum. It does not need to be required for you to graduate. It just enhances what you're learning in the classroom, which is why it's called curricular practical training. It gives you outside of the classroom experience, match with what you're learning. So if you're an accounting major, for example, or finance major, if you were an accounting intern, for example, that would be CPT. CPT, again, can be part-time, full-time. It can be paid or unpaid. Mostly at IIT, we normally stress that CPT is paid so that our students are not taken advantage of by any employer. But the regulation does allow for you to do part-time or to do unpaid or paid CPT. Okay, so if we're shifting a little bit to the middle, there's OPT. This is optional practical training. This is the work authorization that allows you to work after you are done with your program, your academic program, all right? With CPT, you need to have a job in hand before you can apply. So you have an offer letter from a US company. With OPT, however, you do not need to have a job in hand to apply for OPT. With OPT, you start the process with the International Center. We give you an I-20 that you then use to apply with USCIS, which is immigration. And then once approved, they send you the card. And the EAD card looks kind of like an ID card. It has your picture, your name, your date of birth, and then it would have the start and the end date of the EAD on it. All right. Most of the time, all our students, and this is nationwide in the US, when you apply for OPT, it's for 12 months. Again, optional practical training. So in the first instance of CPT, the employer is not sponsoring your work authorization. They're just giving you an offer letter like they would anyone. Also for OPT, you do not need to have a job offer in hand before you can apply. You apply for the work authorization. Once you're approved, you show that to your employer, and then they use it for your hiring paperwork for you to work. So again, in that status, there is no, the employer is not required to sponsor your immigration. You can work for any employer as long as the job that you are doing relates to your field of study. So like the example that I gave earlier, where I said if you're an accounting major and you got an internship in an accounting law firm, or let's say you're an architecture major and you got an internship in an accounting, in an architectural firm, right? For OPT, the work can be part-time, it can be full-time, it can be paid, it can be unpaid as well. Although I know that for most people, they will want the paid position, which makes sense. All right. And then last but not least, for the sake of this conversation, there's STEM OPT. And STEM is STEM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. This means that if you are obtaining a major in sciences, technology, engineering, or math, which is a lot of the majors that we have at Illinois Tech, you would then be eligible to extend your OPT for an additional 24 months. So let me rewind a little bit. The first OPT that every international student is eligible for is for 12 months. That's any major, music, psychology, computer science, you get 12 months. If you graduate, however, with a STEM major, then you're able to extend that OPT for 2 more years, meaning that when you graduate from IIT, you are able to work for a US employer without the US employer sponsoring you for up to 3 years if you are a STEM major. I will say that the majority of our majors at IIT are STEM based. Our architecture programs, many of them are STEM. Our design program is STEM. Of course, computer science, College of Engineering, all of the majors, College of Science are STEM. So many of our students are tied to IIT for up to 3 years after they graduate. And I'll say this and then I'll stop talking for now. While you're on OPT and STEM OPT, you are still in F1 status. IIT is still your sponsor for immigration. You still have to deal with our office while you're in that status. The only time that you're no longer on F1 is, let's say you decide to permanently leave the US and you go back home, or you go to another country, or you change status to like H-1B. At that point, you are no longer a student. You're no longer someone who's on OPT or STEM OPT. One quick point that I want to sneak in that I just remembered. While you are in the US as an international student, you get OPT for each academic level. So if you do a bachelor's degree, you get 12 months plus 24 months if you're STEM. And then master's, the same thing. And then PhD, the same thing. It's per level, not program. So if you do 2 master's degrees, you only get 12 plus 24 because it's per academic level. And with that, I will hand things over back to T.
Thank you, Kemmie, again. We're lucky to have Kemmie. She is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to these processes. And does a great job of staying up to date as well. I see a few specific questions. We'll get to those in just a bit. But I'd like to turn it over to you, Matt, to talk a little bit about your experience in working with employers. And one of the conversations we had early on was really what you shared with me, is that a lot of employers actually don't understand the hiring process for international students. Can you share a little bit about that in terms of your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely, T. And Kemmie, that was a phenomenal overview. And and our kind of philosophy as people are job seekers is you want to be able to educate prospective employers about the situation. What I've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is there, especially kind of in small to mid-sized organizations, which are frankly growing and hiring the most right now, is they're fairly unsophisticated when it comes to these topics. So by taking control of your own job search and really, being proactive and communicating your situation and what that means for prospective employers, and that it frankly is not that complicated, it's going to go a long ways. I think that was sort of my main point with what Kemmie was saying is, it's probably a foreign concept to you all that people in our country, or employers in particular, are this, sort of uneducated when it comes to some of the, the situations with this. So what do we always encourage is just, again, take control of your career, be able to explain your situation, what that means, and frankly, what the burden is for them if they hire someone who is on an OPT or OPT STEM, as Kemmie described, because it's quite a bit easier, and it's a phenomenal foot in the door for someone. Finding your first job is always really the hardest job for anybody, right? Because if you don't have prior experience, you haven't been able to prove yourself, it can be tough to show who you are and what you're capable of. But if you're able to do an internship, or to be able to, get on board and start to prove yourself, it'll make the transition to growing with an organization that much easier.
Great, that's really, really helpful, Matt. Just a reminder, if you could actually pose all your questions to the Q&A instead of the chat, that'll be easier for us to monitor. Second thing, for those that are attending, I know some of you will have very specific questions, and that's okay. But also, in some cases, it may be a little bit easier to engage directly with the iCenter. And for privacy reasons, you may want to be just a little cognizant of the kind of questions you're asking as well within the Q&A, because it can be viewed by everyone. So we just want to be cognizant of that as well. So great. Next question, and then we'll get to some of the questions within the Q&A as well, is really, about how to stand out as a candidate. So, I can talk a little bit about this, but Kemmie, Matt, please chime in. And Matt, you started talking about this, is how do you actually advocate for yourself? And then when it comes to the actual documents and application, how do you actually bring out your skills in your resume and so forth? We'll start there. I know we'll probably have some questions about interviewing as well, but how do you bring that out in your resume? And how do you actually start advocating for yourself when you're searching for a position, whether you're looking to use CPT or OPT?
We look at it as sort of a multi-step process when you're targeting a new opportunity. We always say you want to begin with where you want to end up, right? So it's targeting prospective employers that interest you, and where there are jobs or opportunities that most interest you, and then you sort of build the plan backwards of how you're going to get there, right? So again, it understand, like, you start with, all right, you want to join an Amazon or a Facebook or a large enterprise tech company, right? That's a lot different than joining kind of a small, mid-sized local organization in a place like Chicago. But either way, you want to figure out where you want to end up and then create the path to get there. So it does start with how you market yourself. That's largely through your resume, or maybe an online profile, by having those really describe who you are, what your capabilities are, and then become kind of the foot in the door with an organization that's most important. From there, you want to figure out how you're going to best get in front of those organizations, and then what you're going to say and how you're going to communicate with them to get there. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but it all starts with a strong, written resume, which again I'm sure the Illinois Tech Career Services can help you with. But it really needs to talk about who you are, what your capabilities are. Work or kind of practical experience always trumps anything else. So that the sooner and kind of more often you can get that, the better. And I think that kind of specifically so what you want to do is ideally build that resume earlier on in your college experience, right? So if you're in your first or second year and you can get an internship or you can get some project-based work, that's going to be highly helpful to how you get the full-time job you want once you do graduate. Again, if you are graduating now, you really want to again do whatever you can to highlight or emphasize that experience. If you're a little bit lighter on that than you'd like, that's where you have to get a little bit more creative in terms of finding an opportunity just to prove yourself. And again, that can be like, it's not uncommon, especially in a market like this, for companies to, essentially start someone off as an intern or kind of start them off on like a project-based assignment for that first, 1 to 3 months. It's just an opportunity to prove yourself. And that really ties into a lot of these concepts of the ease with which they can bring you on, where it doesn't require a full, visa or, a full sponsorship or anything like that, where they have the window or the path to get to know you and get to see the work you can do over the 1 to 2 years while you're, underneath this 24-month window of OPT.
That's really helpful, Matt. One thing, a couple things I would add to that. One is, as difficult as it seems, I would encourage you to be very concise in your job search and have a very directed job search as well. The more that you can really apply your skills, showcase your skills to that specific employer, the better chance you'll have of standing out as well. I think that's key. I think especially in these times, a lot of the students that I've met with, I think the approach often is, well, let's take a really big, wide approach and let's just get my resume out there all over the place. While, in some cases, you may get some hits out of that, I think that's probably that scattered approach is probably not the best use of your time. I think the more directed you can be in terms of tailoring your resume and any other subsequent materials, I think is really important in terms of your search. So.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that too, that's definitely great advice. As a recruiter or a hiring person, it's very clear when someone's taking that sort of scattershot approach. And and quite frankly, with the market the way it is, there's hundreds and sometimes thousands of applications for an opportunity. And if it's just a blanket, submission that didn't take any sort of time or customization, you have that much, a lower likelihood of getting a response. But if it's clear that someone, researched an opportunity, sent a targeted message with who they are, why they're interested in this opportunity, ideally drawing some sort of commonality or some sort of shared interests, you have just a better chance or likelihood of getting an interview. And ultimately, that's really your goal of a resume in particular, but just kind of the application process in general. All it is an opportunity to talk about yourself, say who you are, explain to a company why they should hire you and why they should take a chance. And so, again, as T said, taking that targeted, tailored version is going to be much more, beneficial. And with that, like, again, there's a lot of different ways to find jobs right now. By just randomly applying online, it's okay. You clearly want to do that, and that should be one of the routes you take to sort of build your list of target companies that interest you. But from there, you want to use all the different tools on the internet, with LinkedIn being a great one, to see, do you know people at these organizations? Are there other IIT alumni there? Just anything. I mean, the unique thing you have when you're an entry-level job seeker is it's new. It's kind of everybody wants to help people out when they're early in their career, especially if there's some sort of commonality. Again, if we went to the same college, or we might be from the same hometown or the same country, or even there's a lot of different different ways you can draw parallels and sort of connect with people. And by sending those sort of targeted, tailored messages, it can be helpful. One specific concept we talk a lot about, and this is probably sort of a bit of a different concept, especially when you're still in college, but we believe that you should target your job search like a salesperson targets new clients. So you need to be very research oriented. You need to understand kind of what the market looks like, and then who you can best target things towards, and then who do you know, like, at that organization that's your best bet of helping you get your foot in the door. Then how do you send kind of a targeted, tailored message to that person? Like, that's just infinitely more successful and more, it'll be much higher, return on your time. Where, again, if you blindly send resumes, you have anywhere from like a 1 to 5% chance of kind of getting hits on that. But if you take that targeted approach, we've seen it be, 5 to 10 times more successful.
That's great advice, Matt. So, well, we got some questions that are coming up. So let's get to some of the questions, and then we'll keep the conversation going. We'll take this to about 12:45 or 12:50, just in terms of time, for today. So first question, and I think, Kemmie, you addressed this. Is architecture now a STEM major? I believe it is, correct?
Yes,
So,
it is. For you to be very sure that your specific major is STEM, you may talk to your academic advisor, but I believe it was earlier in 2019 that a news press article went out and everything, and architecture and Institute of Design are both STEM majors. With IIT, we have had students from both majors apply for STEM and they were approved for it. So we're good.
okay, great, great, thank you. And that would apply to the Bachelor's of Architecture degree as well, correct? So, okay, that's what I thought. So next question is pretty specific. You know, it's related to EAD and unemployment.
I think I would echo what T said earlier for this person to please make an appointment with one of our advisors or to email icenter@iit.edu, and I'll put that in the chat for us, for everyone to see. That's something that we want to work with you one-on-one on. So that's not something that is appropriate for us to address in this forum. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So please, you know, again, talk to Kemmie and her team about those really specific questions because they are here to help. Next question. I see this a lot, and this is, I think, both for you, Kemmie and Matt. Questions, you know, regarding the job application, right? So typically they're online these days. There's a job application and so forth. And the question is, do you now or in the future require sponsorship? Yes or no? And what is the most appropriate answer for international students? So I guess, you know, often in some cases, those questions could come up during a career fair as well. And so if you both want to kind of talk a little bit about it from your perspective, I certainly have some thoughts as well, but certainly be interested in hearing from both of you.
Yeah, why don't you go first, Kemmie?
Yeah, because my perspective is a little limited. I always advise students that tell the truth as to your current situation. So if you are a STEM major and you do not require a sponsorship in the next 3 years, you don't require a sponsorship in the next 3 years because you have OPT and you have STEM. I always also encourage that if there's a space in the application to put comments, specify in there that I am on OPT, plus I will have STEM in this EAD for the next 3 years. After those 3 years, I may need sponsorship, FYI or something. But tell the truth. I don't want anyone to be penalized for lying on an application. So those are the two things that I've normally told students. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same thing. I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. Again, you always, you know, within a new job, you need to be straightforward. You need to be, you know, you never want to mislead people because that's just not a good way to start a relationship. The advice I take beyond that is, you know, you want to work as much as possible to get outside of the application process, at least to start. I mean, eventually eventually that's the way all jobs, companies sort of get people onboarded. But like, if there's no, as Kemmie said, if there's no opportunity to tell your story through a cover letter or even a comment section, like you're going to really be screened out in a lot of situations where you check that no, and there's a chance that nobody ever sees your resume, right? And I can't say that for sure. There might be a little bit of hyperbole, but I think there's enough merit to it that you have to take it seriously. So you have to think creatively, or what are we going to do? How am I going to ensure that my resume gets on the desk of someone who can actually look at it and give me a chance? So that's where, like I said, I think you want to sort of draw connections you have at that organization. And listen, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Clearly, a warm connection is number one, and that means someone who knows the person who's in the hiring authority. You can hand them your resume and say, hey, hire this person because they're great and they'd be a phenomenal fit. But like if you don't have that warm connection, at least you're better off kind of doing a cold connection where, one thing we encourage people to do is create kind of customized cover letters that talk a little about yourself and sort of why a company would, should consider you. And, in that you can, use your situation with, this OPT and use it as an advantage, because frankly, that's really a trend that companies are going with from a hiring perspective is, no, they may not want to, they may not want to, to sponsor someone from day one, but, what they love is the opportunity to bring someone on for 1 to 2 to 3 years. And after you've shown that ability that you're a great employee in that time, they're much, much more likely to invest the time and money, because it's so much harder to replace someone who's got 2 to 3 years of practical experience with that, with your organization, versus, the cost to sponsor and actually put somebody through the green card process. So again, be straightforward, be honest, but if you feel that box is, is going to limit you from ever getting your foot in the door, you need to be a little bit more aggressive, and you need to kind of go outside of the traditional, the traditional black box ATS system to, ensure that your resume gets seen.
Great advice from both of you. I would wholeheartedly agree. And that's part of the reason we're doing this is really to have a better understanding of the process as well. And the perspective, that folks see from employers. Next question is actually a good question, and it's related to the job search, and maybe it's a little bit more of a clarification for you, Kemmie, as it relates to OPT and the I-20. So for example, if someone is looking to go into the IT, what is considered a traditional IT software company, how does that fit if someone is studying electrical engineering, for example, in terms of optional practical training, if I'm understanding this question correctly?
Yeah, this is a very good question. It is a question that is as old as I've been in this profession. Students want to know, is the job that I am about to step into directly related to my field of study? And I always answer it in a way that it would sound as if it doesn't sound, it may not be what you want to hear, but let me unpack that for a minute. We are experts in immigration, but we're not experts when it comes to architecture and marketing and electrical engineering, ITM, and all the majors that IIT or other schools have, right? So sometimes students expect us to say yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. And that's very hard. What I tell students as a measure of yes or no is, are parts of your job things that you learned while doing your degree holistically, right? Not just your major, because in many schools, as you're doing your major, you took, other classes that were tangentially related to your major, right? But you have this one major listed on your transcript. So as long as portions and parts of your job functions on a daily basis are related to things that you studied in your majors, classes you took, papers you wrote, projects that you worked on, it is fine. The DSOs or the advisors in my office, we're not, it's hard for us to make that determination, but that's what we always defer to, that you, as long as you're seeing those things in your job functions on a day-to-day basis, that may be the answer to your question.
Very, very helpful. Matt, from your perspective, do you come across this in terms of just reviewing resumes and so forth when working with specific clients?
Not as much. I can tell you, you're always going to have it's the path of least resistance. So the stronger your experience is in a particular area, the more likely you're going to be able to get a job with that background. But I'm not as experienced with sort of how that would apply to, the OPT or sort of, the sponsorship.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is actually, I think I'll start with you, Matt, and it's related in my mind about, standing out as a candidate. So the question is really, the person is being rejected based upon location. I'm not actually sure what that specifically means, right offhand as I'm reading the question. But how do you convey this to human resources during the initial conversations?
Yeah, I can speak to that. It's interesting. And I answer this in sort of at two ends of the time spectrum. 4 to 6 months ago, this was a tremendous challenge, because companies are just so much more likely to interview and hire someone who's within, a drive of their office, right? People just are more comfortable hiring people who are close by, who can, interview on a day's notice, who can start in 2 weeks and don't need a lot of the challenge logistically of moving. Now the world is, I mean, to say the world has changed a lot in the last 4 months is obviously a bit of an understatement, but that is probably the number one change we've seen. So you have a greater ability to do that now and for these next 6 months than you ever have. With that said, I sort of take a common sense approach to it. And the reason why companies are, you know, it is purely the logistics of like, they're less, you know, as a recruiter, it's, you know, especially if you're in a market where there's a ton of talent, you're going to be drawn to the 5 people who are within 30 miles and can be in your office, you know, tomorrow afternoon for an interview versus someone who may be 2,000 miles away. So, you know, it's tough. There's not a simple answer, but I guess that is the one advantage of the world we live in now is companies are more apt to consider people anywhere and everywhere for a job. But, you know, assuming the world gets back to normal at some point in time, there's kind of 2 answers. One is you just make it extremely clear that you are not just, and this is a fine line between, again, you always want to tell the truth and be straightforward, but you want to make it clear you are planning to move to this location, whether you get this job or not. Because part of it where, you know, not only is it difficult logistically to coordinate for someone who's not physically there, but you're putting a lot of time and effort for someone who's frankly maybe looking at 5 different cities, right? Like, you know, so you wanna, if you're applying to a role in Chicago and you live in Atlanta, say, or, you know, I guess in this situation, it'd be the flip side, but you want to make it clear why you're looking to move to that location. Ideally, that you have some sort of tie to it, whether it's family there, and hey, you know, I can be there within, you know, 3 days for an interview, and I can be there within 2 weeks to start. I've got family there, and I've got a place to stay, or I've got a lease signed, or any of these different things. Like if it's clear that that's one of 7 different locations you're looking for, it's going to be that much harder to have them take you seriously as a candidate.
That's helpful, Matt. And I would echo that. Things have definitely changed pretty quickly. I don't think any of us, you know, in January could imagine the type of conversations we've been having recently in terms of not only job search, but everything else as it has to do with COVID. So, so thank you for sharing that. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as can, and I apologize if we don't get to all these questions. But 2 really good questions for you, Kemmie. Fairly specific. If you could address the timeline for OPT as well. You know, I realize that individuals usually have 3 months to find a position, right? Once OPT starts the clock, so to speak. And the question is, what if there's no positions? If an individual is not able to secure a position, what's next?
Let me unmute first.
Okay.
Let's talk about timeline very generally. International students can apply for OPT as early as 90 days before graduation or as late as 60 days after graduation, right? So as we head into the fall semester, the earliest you can apply is sometimes in September. And then the latest, so to speak, that you can apply would be early February. All right, if you're graduating December 2020. If there are no paid positions on OPT, I specifically emphasize paid because I know that that would be the preference of anyone, myself included. What you can then do is go the route of unpaid, right? Legally, you are permitted to do OPT. The first portion of OPT, the one that I said is for 12 months, you are permitted to do that unpaid. STEM cannot be unpaid, but that's a different conversation. So if you're concerned about, you know, time is running out with OPT, be open initially to an unpaid position. I started my career of 15 years plus that you're hearing me about today as an unpaid intern. I was ready to get into the field. And I didn't care that it, in fact, the internship that I first did was required for my master's. And then the university that I worked for then said, hey, we have an unpaid position at the front desk. And I was like, sure. And then they offered me another unpaid position. And I was like, sure. I wanted the experience. And then eventually, because I have all this unpaid, but still it was experience, I was able to talk about that in my interview into my first paid position. So be willing, be open, especially because COVID has happened. Companies and employers have lost funding, they've lost, things. So be open to unpaid positions as opposed to going back home initially. Yeah.
I was looking ahead. That's great advice, Kemmie. And I was looking ahead. I believe a future question or somebody had in chat, where that's absolutely right now it's a tough time to find a new job, right? Like there's no simple answer around it. I mean, the positive, I'd say, I've been doing this an incredibly long time. I mean, we went from Q1, which was as busy of a quarter as we've had, to Q2, where it was just the bottom fell out of the market. And in like the space we're in, by working with these kind of small, mid-sized, and frankly large tech companies, is still one of the most resilient ones. But just the level of drop we saw Q2 was unprecedented. On the bright side, as we've entered Q3, we've definitely seen an uptick. I think unfortunately for like internships and or entry-level hiring, that tends to lag a little bit behind experienced hiring. So it's going to be tricky. Like there's not a simple, great, here's a silver bullet and you're going to have, plenty of job offers. But the best thing you can do is exactly what Kemmie just said, where be open, be creative, in terms of, to the person who asked about, sending messages to IIT alum but not having any success. Take it a step further. Like, are there small projects? Are there, is there anything you can do, paid or unpaid? Of course, everybody would rather be paid, but at this point, you have to get your foot in the door. You have to do whatever it takes to find a new opportunity, and it's that vital to prove yourself, and it makes sense. But what I always suggest people do is kind of look at the whole funnel. Like, where are you struggling the most? Are you not getting any? You're not getting any interviews, then you need to look at, who are you targeting? Is your messaging right? Are you not you have to rethink your resume or your outreach communication or anything like that, or how you're describing yourself. If you're getting to the point where you actually are getting interviews, you're just not getting offers. All right, do you need a little bit of help or a little bit of coaching on the interview process, or how you sell yourself, or how you position yourself to future employers? But also understand it is just a challenging time. And what we are telling people sort of at every end of the spectrum is it takes twice the work right now to unfortunately get half the results. So it's not a fun thing to hear. And I am, very empathetic or sympathetic to anybody who's graduating right now, because it is an especially challenging time. But, this will pass, and you just have to work through it, and it'll, but you can't let the market we're in right now define you, because that is possible, right? Like, it is going to be hard to find something, and you have to work twice as hard to get that opportunity, to ensure that 3 to 5 years from now, you're in a great spot. And it's easy for that not to be the case, because some people just lose the next 6 to 12 months because they're struggling to find something. So you just have to do whatever it takes to get that experience, get your foot in the door, and to stand out.
That's good advice, Matt. I would add to that, definitely keep your options open, at this stage. Some folks may have a fairly narrow view of what they're looking for. And I think, especially given the circumstances and situation, I think it's really important, especially now, to keep those options open. I would also echo that on the career service side of things. We are starting to see things open up a little bit. I just remember, part of my role is related to corporate relations. And in March, when we basically all left campus, the calls just dropped off for me in terms of the corporate relations connection side of things. And they've gradually picked up, to now where at least it's steady, certainly not the level where it was at prior, but it's been really interesting to kind of see the volume and so forth. And Matt's right, this time will pass. This is at least my third recession during this work too for Kemmie. Okay, we're counting. But it will pass. It will pass. So stay confident and definitely stay hopeful. We've got a few minutes remaining, and I do want to get one specific technical question. It's for you, Kemmie, as it relates to obtaining a social security number. I just think it's it's a good question, and related to work and so forth as well. So.
Yeah, so when you start CPT, which is Curricular Practical Training, you would approach the Social Security Administration to ask for your Social Security number. And then they will issue it to you. I think they normally send it out 2 to 3 weeks later. However, if you never had an internship and you're graduating this upcoming fall semester, when you apply for OPT, you have the ability to apply for your EAD card and the Social Security at the same time. So at some point, I want to say late 2018, early 2019, both the Social Security Administration and the US government teamed up finally, and they allow students who do not have a Social Security number to apply for one at the same time. So again, if you've never had a number in the US and you're applying for OPT, the question will be asked on the form, do you have a Social Security number? And if you say no, you can then say yes to the next question, which would be you applying for that number. And that's basically how you can apply for a Social Security number. I will also add this, that because of COVID, I know that many of the Social Security Administration offices closed down. And what we were telling our students at the end of spring and early summer is that technically, and we do have this information on the iCenter webpage, technically your employer can start you working on an internship without a Social Security number. It's a little bit technical. I'll find the link and I'll drop it in quickly. But I want to say now that many of those Social Security Administration offices are opening or are already open. So you don't have to do any kind of workaround for that one. But yeah, that's basically the gist of how you can obtain a Social Security number.
Very helpful. Matt, I do want to get this question in the remaining time for you, and it's related to a question that we get a lot of, and it's regarding applicant tracking systems, ATS software. And the question is specifically how you can compare your resume with a job description. So if you could speak a little bit, about ATS systems as well, and in that question, Matt. So
yeah, so that's the question of a few back about clicking yes or no, whether you need sponsorship now or down the line. Like those are information that along with your resume goes into an ATS or an applicant tracking system. So picture the front end, you see a company that's hiring, right? You see a job description, you then apply. I think at this point, everybody's seen that process. So that applicant tracking system is what the recruiters work through to manage their hiring, and oftentimes feeds their total employee system. This is a space that's come a long way over the last, couple of years, but unfortunately it's still not great. So it's very, it's very easy, you apply for something, you can go into, a company's ATS, but, there's so much kind of automation and sort of technical stuff that happens on the front end that like the odds of your resume being seen have become smaller and smaller. So, there are tools, and then I mentioned the chat, like, so Careerwell.io is the site we've launched. And we're going to do a combination of content, some training, but also tools to help people with the job search process. And then one of the tools we have that we're launching is exactly that. It's called our resume refinery, where basically you drop in your resume, you drop in a job description, and it'll compare, it'll score it. So now, it's interesting. Like I could go off on a pretty long tangent. I won't on this concept. An applicant tracking system is purely a gatekeeper. You want to ensure that if you're in there, you bubble to the top. You could also spend days trying to optimize a resume and kind of going crazy in the efforts to do so. Like you want to make sure there's no glaring mistakes or omissions, right? You don't want any typos. You want it to be a nice, clean, like easy to read, easy to follow, and easily searched, document. So those are the key things. And if there's a specific role that you're interested in, you want to make sure that your resume is going to do well enough that it doesn't get, knocked out by the AI or the bots that are essentially doing any of the reviews. But, again, that's why I still circle back to that concept of doing whatever you can to frankly avoid being just at the whim or the mercy of an ATS and sort of whomever is doing that first line of review, whether it's, technology or kind of a low level recruiter that isn't necessarily vested in you and kind of your career.
Great advice. And certainly my office has some experience with the ATS systems too. And we certainly be happy to address any more questions related to that. I do want to make a quick plug for a new resource that we have coming out with probably by early August, mid-August at the latest, and that's VMAC. We're bringing that out for our current students and recent alumni. So VMAC will allow you to get real-time feedback on your resume and a feedback score as well. So that's something we're offering, and hopefully that's going to really help lead to better conversations when you meet with our advisors as well, and really help you in terms of tailoring your resume to the areas that you're seeking. So we're really happy to be able to offer that. So more to come on that within a few weeks. So we're at the end of our time, but I want to ask Kemmie, Matt, if you have any last words. And I apologize we didn't get to all the questions. Again, reach out to Kemmie or myself for any specific questions related to the university. And I'm sure, Matt, your information is available as well. But any last words, Kemmie and Matt, that you'd like to share with the group?
Just to answer some of the questions I saw, yes, the recording will be available. I think T's office would make that available through Handshake for anyone who registered to be able to watch. And then secondly, if you have any specific questions related to yourself, your status, what you should do, when to do it, please do reach out to the International Center. We are still working remotely. We advise 4 days a week. We're answering the phones virtually. We're answering our emails as well. We are here to assist you. And then once the fall semester starts, there will be dedicated OPT workshops, again, virtually, that you can watch, where we will go over the timelines of OPT and STEM in detail. We spent about an hour and a half doing it, and then we'll also take questions virtually. So this is not the end of it today. Be on the lookout we would host those OPT workshops, I want to say once a month for the fall semester. We normally do it in person, but now that it's virtual, we may even be able to do it more. But again, thank you for attending today. Stay strong. You will get through this. We promise you will. All right. That's it. Thank you for me.
Thank you, Kemmie. Matt, any last words?
Yeah, I think Kemmie hit on a lot of key points. As we said, it's a challenging time, but you're in a unique situation where you have a lot of resources. Like, you have to take advantage of them between T and Kemmie and the whole Illinois Tech Career Services. They're great. They know what they're doing. I think can't underemphasize is just the time and effort you have to put into this, right? Like it's you've worked hard to get where you are, by allocating 10 to 15 hours a week for these until you find your next opportunity that's worth it. And so that means 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day of research, of communication, set goals, set kind of what do you want to do? You want to reach out to 20 to 30 new places a week. You want to have, 5 to 6 interviews, whether they're informational or not. Do whatever you can there. Like I said, it's hard work, and it frankly gets a lot of people out of their sweet spot, whether they're, no matter where they're from or what their situation is. But, I think in general, when you're 19 to 22 years old, like it's not in your sweet spot to kind of be this aggressive with kind of going after and doing things, but it's really the only answer. And you just work hard and it'll pay off is the number one thing I can say. Yeah,
it will pay off. So, special thanks to Matt and Kemmie, for attending. I guess that's a virtual handshake that I'll give you. Thanks for taking the time. And thank you to all of you for really taking the time to attend today as well. We know you have a lot going on and a lot to consider. Again, we're available to assist. We didn't get to all the questions, but please reach out for any other specific questions that you may have. So thank you again. And this will conclude our webinar for today. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.